Hey guys. Tonight we're descending into the dim, stale air of an underground bunker. Not just any bunker, but that bunker. The one whispered about by guards who never slept the same again. The one that still makes the walls of Berlin hum when the wind gets too low. You know the one I mean, the bunker that belonged to Hitler. It's a strange choice for bedtime. I know, but somehow, the scariest stories are the ones that once felt perfectly normal to the people living them. You're about to hear one of those stories. And trust me, you probably wouldn't survive a week down there. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where and when you're listening from. I love imagining our little global campfire of sleepy history lovers. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the Fear Bunker, 1945. The world above is crumbling. But down here the air is almost too quiet, too still. As if it's holding its breath. The concrete walls sweat with condensation. And the single light bulb overhead flickers like it's nervous to be part of this scene. You can smell rust, stale coffee, and the faint sweetness of decay, not from bodies, but from despair itself. The guards talk about whispers. At first, just faint echoes from the ventilation shafts, someone repeating orders from days ago. Hold the line, no surrender. Der Führer will lead us. Only, no one is saying them now. You tilt your head toward the ceiling and swear you hear footsteps above. But that's impossible. The entire street above has been leveled by bombs. The ground trembles slightly, not from shelling, but like the earth itself sighs in exhaustion. One guard, his name was Karl, claimed he once followed the sound of murmuring through the halls. Thinking maybe one of the adjutants had left a radio on, he traced it down to a small storage room with a single bare cot, a tin cup, and a wall of damp concrete. The whispers stopped the moment he entered. Then, after a pause, a voice, his own voice, repeated the last words he had said out loud. "Who's there?" Karl didn't speak again for a week. The others laughed nervously, said he was tired. They were all tired. But then another guard, Wilhelm, started hearing it too. This time, it wasn't words. It was laughter, faint, dry laughter, echoing through the vent at precisely 3:17 every morning. Always 3:17, the same time, the same tone, never louder, never closer. They tried sealing the vent. The laughter came from behind the wall instead. You sit there now, imagining that sound in the dark. The kind of sound that doesn't feel external. Like it's coming from the air inside your own skull. Some of the men said the bunker was alive. That it was recording their guilt, their fear, their madness. Others said Hitler himself had summoned something down there, not soldiers. Not ghosts, but a kind of punishment. History remembers the Fear Bunker as a place of command. But it was also a tomb of paranoia. The whispers were said to grow stronger whenever someone lied. One stenographer swore the walls themselves could tell when you were faking loyalty. "The concrete knows," she said once, eyes wide. "It breathes when you lie." A historian decades later suggested it was all due to the strange acoustics, the curved ceilings and narrow hallways bouncing sound in unnatural ways. But others disagree. You can't explain away voices that call your name when no one knows it. It wasn't just voices, either. There were drafts that smelled like burning oil. Even when no generators were running. Doors that refused to open unless you whispered something, anything, into the darkness first. And once, one of Hitler's secretaries wrote in her diary that she dreamed of the walls closing in like wet paper. You can imagine her, can't you? Writing that by candlelight, as explosions shake the ceiling dust loose. Her handwriting trembling as she tries to believe this is still reality. She probably thought it was just stress. They all did, but then she heard her own name whispered from behind the door she'd just locked. Some say the whispers were simply the trapped voices of men who had made too many lies to keep track of. Others believe the bunker absorbed their secrets, turning them into echoes that refused to die. A few of the last officers who fled claimed they could still hear Hitler's voice days later, muttering in the dark, giving phantom orders to invisible armies. You smile slightly at the thought, how even a monster can't escape the sound of his own ghosts. It's darkly poetic, isn't it? The most feared man in history. Surrounded not by generals or allies in the end, but by murmurs of his own making. And maybe, just maybe, those whispers never left. There are maintenance workers who swear, even now, that when they enter the sealed remnants of the bunker beneath the streets of Berlin, they hear a faint humming. One described it as 1,000 people trying to confess all at once. Another refused to go back after hearing someone behind him breathe out the word, "Bleib." Stay. Of course, skeptics dismiss all of this. They say it's vibration from passing trains, pipes settling, imagination, but those same skeptics never go down there alone. And you, sitting here, listening in the half-dark, might be wondering if these tales are exaggerated. If it's all folklore wrapped around history's most infamous man. Maybe, yet every legend begins somewhere. Perhaps the air down there really did remember. You can almost hear it now, that slow, dragging breath, the echo of footsteps that aren't yours, and a faint murmur in German that translates roughly to, "He's still listening." The whisper fades, but the chill stays. You pull your blanket a little tighter, half laughing to yourself. It's just a story, right? Still, if you ever visit Berlin and feel a cold draft where there shouldn't be one, don't look for its source. Just keep walking, slowly, quietly. Because down there, beneath the city, some voices never stopped speaking. The cursed painter. You wake in the middle of the night with a strange image in your mind. A face you've never seen. Half finished on a canvas that no longer exists. The eyes are piercing blue. The jaw too square. The smile too measured to be kind. It's unsettling. How real it feels. That's how the story of the painter begins. He wasn't famous, not then. Not now. His name was whispered in art circles only as the Führer's painter. A man chosen to immortalize Hitler in oil and light. But the strangest thing wasn't that he painted the dictator, it was that he vanished the day he finished. Completely. No farewell. No body. No signature on the last work. Just gone. You imagine him walking the marble halls of the Chancellery, palette in one hand, a brush trembling slightly in the other. Hitler wanted portraits that would make him look like a savior, not too harsh, not too human. "Paint me as history will remember me," he reportedly said. But that's a dangerous request, isn't it? History tends to remember what it wants. The painter agreed, though perhaps not entirely willingly. He had once been a surrealist, fond of twisting dreamscapes and distorted faces. The regime had banned such art as degenerate. Yet here he was, serving the very man who despised his kind. Maybe he thought cooperation was survival. Maybe he thought he could smuggle truth into beauty. The first few sittings went smoothly. Hitler was polite, even charming in a performative way, asking about technique, about color balance. But by the third sitting, the painter began to notice something strange. The shadows on Hitler's face wouldn't behave. He'd paint them soft, diffused. Yet every morning the pigment dried darker, almost black. He tried new brushes, new mixes. Same result. The darkness crept further each day, swallowing half the face. One night, he scraped the layer off entirely and repainted it under lamplight. But when he woke, the same black stain had returned, deeper, richer, like it had bled from the canvas itself. Rumors say he started talking to the painting. At first, just muttering, then full conversations. The guards thought it was nerves. But one night, a janitor heard two voices in the studio, one calm, one low and guttural. When he peeked inside, there was only the painter, standing still, brush frozen midair, staring at the face he'd made. The janitor swore the portrait blinked. You shift slightly in your bed. That kind of detail makes your skin crawl. But stay with it, because the strangest part isn't the blinking. It's what happened next. The day before the unveiling, the painter invited Hitler for a final viewing. The Führer stood there, silent for several minutes, eyes locked on his own image. Then, quietly, he told everyone else to leave the room. Only the painter and the dictator remained. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Then the guards outside heard something, not shouting, but a dull, rhythmic knocking, like a brush tapping the floor. When they finally entered, the easel was empty. The canvas was still wet. The painter's palette lay broken. And on the floor, a single black handprint, smeared as if dragged toward the wall. He was never seen again. The painting, though, it survived. For a while, after the war, Allied officers catalogued the looted art stored in underground bunkers and found an unsigned portrait matching Hitler's likeness. Half-shadowed, unfinished, it was stored briefly in a Berlin archive before being lost to a mysterious fire in 1947. Some say the fire wasn't accidental. One American officer reportedly burned it himself after waking to find the eyes on the canvas had changed color overnight, from blue to red. Another rumor claims the painting still exists, hidden in a private collection, but no photo has ever surfaced. Historians argue about whether this man ever truly existed. No official record of his commission remains. Yet, a few old photographs show an unfamiliar figure standing behind Hitler during early propaganda sessions. A man with an artist's smock and hollow eyes. Maybe it was him, maybe not, but the whispers persist. That his final work captured something the camera couldn't, the corruption beneath the skin. The darkness no lens could hold. There's even a story that one of his earlier portraits, a soft landscape, still hangs in a Bavarian villa. Locals say when lightning flashes at night, the paint briefly flickers, revealing faces buried beneath the hills, screaming silently, as if trapped in the oil. You can almost see the painter now. Can't you? Sitting alone, his candle sputtering, muttering to the face that won't stay still. Maybe he wasn't cursed. Maybe he just painted what was already there, something the rest of the world refused to see. And maybe that's why he disappeared. Because once you've seen evil so clearly that it paints itself for you, what else is there to look at? Some ghosts don't linger in houses or battlefields. They linger in the color you choose, in the canvas that remembers your touch. So if you ever find yourself at a flea market in Berlin, and a man offers you a portrait with history, maybe don't buy it, no matter how cheap. Because sometimes, the art doesn't hang on the wall, it hangs on you. You wake to the sound of something distant, a metallic clatter. Faint and rhythmic. It takes a second before you realize what it reminds you of. A train. Strange, isn't it? How trains still carry their own ghosts. Even when the tracks are gone, your mind fills in the missing sound, the steady clack, clack, clack rolling through memory. Tonight's story is about one of those ghosts. The Germans called it Der Geisterzug, the ghost train. The one that never reached its destination. The year was 1945. And the Reich was crumbling like wet paper. Bombs turned cities into ash. And soldiers turned to superstition faster than faith. Somewhere in the mountains of southern Germany, a secret train left Munich under heavy guard. Its mission? To transport the Reich's stolen gold, art, and archives to a safe place. No one knew exactly where that place was, not even the crew. They were told to follow the route through Bavaria, keep their mouths shut, and expect no stops. But the train never arrived anywhere. It simply vanished. You imagine it now, 10 carriages. Armored and silent, painted black to blend into the night. Inside, crates of gold bars stamped with eagles. Paintings ripped from Parisian galleries. Crates labeled only, archive. Soldiers on board smoked nervously. Their faces lit in brief orange flashes. Outside, the snow fell thick, muffling the sound of the wheels. And then, nothing. When Allied patrols reached the region days later, they found tracks leading into a tunnel, and none leading out. Inside, there was no train, only rails twisted like ribbon, and the faint smell of engine oil. The walls were scorched, but not from fire, as if something massive had passed through too quickly, melting everything in its wake. Locals had their own version of the story. They said the train had entered the mountain on the night of a strange storm, lightning without thunder. Snow that fell upward. Shepherds swore they heard screams echoing through the valley for hours. The next morning, the tunnel was blocked by rock. A century later, miners reopening the passage claimed to find old boot prints pressed into the walls, as if the stone had been soft once. Like wax. You can't help but shiver at that detail. Officially, the gold train has never been confirmed. Every few years, treasure hunters show up with metal detectors, conspiracy podcasts, and bravado. They dig, they measure, they pose for photos. Then, as night falls, they pack up and leave early. Always early. They never explain why. One journalist in the 1980s stayed longer. He wrote that while camping near the sealed entrance. He woke to the unmistakable sound of wheels, slow, deliberate, rolling just beyond the rock. When he put his ear to the ground, he swore he could feel vibrations. He left the next morning without his tent. Some say the train is still moving, endlessly circling a loop that doesn't exist anymore. Its cargo cursed to remain in motion. Others claim it was buried intentionally, sealed in with its passengers, who were caught stealing what wasn't theirs. But the strangest version? That the train carried not just gold, but people, prisoners, scientists, experiments, all recorded as property of the state. When the officers realized the war was lost, they locked the cars and ordered the engineer to drive straight into the mountain, full speed. No one knows if he obeyed. Some nights, hikers report hearing a low horn echoing through the valley. Not loud, distant, mournful, like a memory of sound rather than the sound itself. Sometimes it's followed by the grinding of metal, and a flicker of light deep in the woods, moving too smooth, too straight to be a flashlight. You might laugh, but the human brain loves patterns. We see faces in clouds, ghosts in fog, trains in the wind. Still, the villagers nearby keep one superstition. If you're walking the old tracks and hear wheels behind you, never turn around, just step off the line. Close your eyes, and count to 10. They say if you look, you'll see passengers staring back, silhouettes of men and women, unmoving, pressed against windows that glow from no source. One historian suggested the story began as an allegory, a folk warning about greed. Others argue there really was a train, and it's simply still buried somewhere. But ask the old railway workers, and they'll tell you something different, that the line itself rejects what it carried. Steel remembers, one said, it hums when ghosts pass over it. And that's what's eerie about the story. It's not just the train that haunts, it's the tracks. Even now, you can find fragments of rusted rails snaking through the forest, vanishing into the earth like veins. Locals avoid walking over them. They say if you stop too long, you can feel the faint pull, like the ground trying to drag you along for the ride. Maybe the gold train never existed. Or maybe it did, and it's still out there, circling beneath us, wheels grinding through the dark. Somewhere, someone hears it. And if you're very quiet, right now, you might too, that soft metallic rhythm, growing fainter, fading into the night. Clack, clack, clack. You've probably heard that forests remember. They keep the echoes of footsteps, the scent of smoke, even the shape of screams if you listen long enough. Tonight, you're walking through one of those memories, the burning forest of Bavaria. The locals call it Der Flusterwald, the whispering woods. But that's a lie of kindness. The truth is, the forest doesn't whisper, it crackles. It started with a strange fire in the spring of 1944. There was no lightning, no dry spell, no explosion, just one night, an orange glow blooming over the Bavarian hills, lighting up the horizon like dawn had come too early. When the villagers arrived, they found trees burning from the inside out. Imagine that, the bark still intact, but flames glowing from within, pulsing like blood through veins. No sound but the soft hiss of sap boiling. The soldiers blamed sabotage, the priests blamed hell, and the scientists, when they came later, blamed spontaneous ignition from stored munitions. But the villagers knew better. The forest had been trying to tell them something for months. Animals had begun leaving, deer, foxes, even birds. The air was wrong. People spoke of hearing marching boots deep in the woods at night. Though no patrols were scheduled, One farmer swore he saw men in uniform walking through the mist, not Wehrmacht. Not allies, but figures without faces, glowing faintly red like embers. He never went back. You walk deeper now, your boots sinking in ash that used to be leaves. Every step makes the ground sigh. You pass a tree split in half. Its heart blackened, its trunk hollow like an open mouth. Inside, the wood still glows after 80 years. Still burning slow, like a coal refusing to die. The story goes that near the end of the war, the Nazis used the forest to dispose of what they couldn't let the Allies find: documents, prototypes, and people. They brought trucks under cover of night, unloaded crates and bodies, and torched everything, but the flames wouldn't spread. They just went down, seeping into the soil instead of up. One soldier, drunk with guilt, confessed later that he saw the ground breathing fire back at us. After the surrender, American investigators came through. They found blackened roots twisted into strange shapes, almost like hands reaching upward. The official report called it thermal distortion, but a few officers refused to camp there. They said they heard whispering in German and English. Sometimes prayers. Sometimes just one word repeated, Zurück. Go back. Even today, hikers claim the forest still burns underground. In winter, snow melts faster there, leaving black patches shaped like footprints. At night, a faint orange shimmer flickers between the trees, like someone walking with a lantern, only there's no one there. You laugh quietly to yourself. It's probably just heat trapped in the earth, right? Science, not spirits. But the villagers don't agree. They say it's the soldiers still marching, the ones ordered to destroy everything, even themselves. A local legend tells of a man named Otto, one of the youngest guards sent to watch the fire. He wrote to his sister that on the third night, the burning stopped making noise, no crackle, no wind, no smoke, just silence. He leaned in to look closer at a glowing pit and saw faces inside, moving like they were underwater. They opened their mouths, but no sound came out. Then, he said, something blinked back at him from the flames. Otto disappeared that same night. His uniform was found neatly folded by the river, his boots pointing toward the trees. Some historians think the entire story was born out of trauma, guilt and rumor. Others think it's one of those dark miracles of nature, like the coal fires in China that burn underground for decades. But you can't shake the feeling that maybe both are true. Because sometimes the earth does remember what we try to bury in it, and sometimes it refuses to let go. There's an eerie calm to it, isn't there? The idea that a forest could burn forever, not wildly, not in rage, but quietly, patiently, like a wound that never heals. If you stand in the right spot, some say you can hear the faint rhythm of marching, not boots. Exactly, but the idea of boots. You feel it in the soles of your feet, as if the past is walking right through you. One hiker once described it best: it wasn't scary. She said, it was sad, like the forest was tired of being angry. Maybe that's the curse, to burn endlessly without being able to scream. You pause at the edge of the clearing now, watching as mist curls through the charred trunks like smoke. The moon catches the edges of the blackened bark, turning them silver, ghosts pretending to be trees. And then, faintly, you hear it, a slow crackle. like someone lighting a match just behind you. You turn. Nothing. But the smell of smoke follows you all the way home. The story drifts tonight to a place colder than fear itself, deep in the Masurian woods of East Prussia, where snow fell in sheets thick enough to bury whole roads overnight. There, hidden beneath layers of pine and secrecy, stood Wolfschanz, the wolf's lair. You might have heard the name before, Hitler's Eastern Front headquarters. A maze of concrete bunkers, minefields, and camouflage nets spread across several square kilometers. It was where major operations were planned, where betrayals happened, and where paranoia slept lightly. But the story tonight isn't about the men who worked there. It's about the children. They called them Die Wolfskinder, the children of the wolf's den. No one knew exactly how many there were. They weren't soldiers, not exactly, and they weren't civilians either. They lived between categories, like shadows given small bodies. Officially, they were orphans, products of bombings, displacements, or special programs. Unofficially, they were experiments in loyalty. Rumor has it that around 1943, someone in Hitler's inner circle began a project: take the youngest survivors of bombed-out cities, bring them to the wolf's lair, and train them to be pure listeners. The idea was simple: children hear what adults can't. They remember commands perfectly. They obey without hesitation. You imagine them, small figures wrapped in gray uniforms. Boots too big, eyes too old. They slept in a converted barracks near the outer perimeter, where the air reeked of diesel and pine needles. At night, they were told to stand still in the snow and listen for intruders. They called it the listening hour. But the woods at night are never silent. The wind through the branches sounded like whispers. The frost cracked like footsteps. Sometimes, a child would claim to hear orders, faint but unmistakable. Advance. Turn left. Hold fire. The officers laughed at first, calling it imagination, but then the reports started matching real movements, enemy patrols hours away. Air raids no one had warned them about. How could they have known? One commander began writing everything the children said. Soon, higher-ranking officers started asking for their predictions. When the children spoke, grown men listened. Then one night, they went too far. A group of 5 children stood in the snow, heads tilted slightly like they were listening to something distant. "He's coming," one said softly. "The wolf is coming for his own." The next morning, a convoy bringing Hitler himself arrived unexpectedly, his personal visit to inspect the front. The soldiers called it a miracle. But miracles are just coincidences we don't understand yet. After that, the listening hour became ritual. Each night, the children lined up, eyes closed, palms open. Some nights they wept, some nights they laughed for no reason at all. And slowly, they stopped speaking to anyone else. When the Red Army advanced in 1944, chaos broke loose. The staff began evacuating. Reports say that when soldiers went to move the children, they found the barracks empty, beds made, boots neatly lined, and small handprints burned into the frost on the windows. No bodies, no tracks, just silence. After the war, the ruins of the wolf's lair became a tourist site. Forest paths wound between shattered bunkers and moss-covered concrete walls. Visitors still report strange sensations, the feeling of being watched, The sound of laughter behind the trees. Some say you can hear a faint chorus of children humming, just beneath the wind. One journalist who recorded the sound played it back later in his hotel room. He swore there was a voice, a child's voice, whispering in German. "We're still listening." Scientists who studied the phenomenon blamed acoustic echo and low-frequency vibration, the kind that makes your stomach twist even when you can't hear anything consciously. But the locals know better. They leave bread and milk near the old fence line every winter. Not for animals, for the ones who never left. You wonder what kind of life they must have known, born into silence. Trained to obey echoes. Maybe they were never ghosts at all. Maybe they just became part of the forest, folded into the same darkness that once hid them. There's something unspeakably sad about the thought that children could become instruments of war. And then stories. And then only whispers in the snow. If you visit Wolfschanz now, you'll see tourists posing for photos beside the crumbling walls. You might even hear a guide explaining where the assassination attempt on Hitler took place. But if you stay late, past sunset, when the wind cuts sharp and the pines begin to creak, stop. Listen carefully. Because they say, sometimes, the air there still breathes like a child trying not to cry. And if you ever hear a small voice whisper, "Achtung," you should probably leave. Silence is not the absence of sound, it's the echo of everything that's been taken away. And tonight, you're walking through one of those absences. A place that used to exist on maps, but doesn't anymore. A village that breathed, and prayed, and sang, until it didn't. They called it Langenfeld, though that name doesn't appear in any atlas now. The Nazis wiped it clean. The Allies never found it. Only the wind remembers the name. And even that comes out broken. The villagers called it Das Schweigende Dorf, the silent village. It was 1942 when the story began. A small, pastoral settlement tucked between the forests of Silesia. With a church, a school, and a bakery whose chimney was the only thing taller than the steeple. The war hadn't touched them much, not yet. News came from radios or wandering soldiers. But the villagers kept their heads down and their candles lit. Then one night, a train stopped on the nearby tracks. It wasn't scheduled. No whistles. No lights. Just the screech of metal against metal and a strange, low hum. The few who saw it said it was full of cattle cars. No one dared look inside. By morning, the train was gone, but a single suitcase remained, sitting by the road. The priest brought it to the church. Inside, children's clothes, one shoe, and a folded piece of paper that said, in smudged ink, "Don't tell them we're here." He burned the note, but not before showing it to the mayor. And that's where the silence began. For the next several nights, soldiers came through, searching the woods. The villagers pretended to know nothing. They whispered prayers, shared bread with the fugitives hiding in barns, and covered footprints in the snow. Every morning, they rang the church bell once, just to say, "We're still here." But on the seventh morning, the bell didn't ring. When the soldiers returned, they found the village empty. Pots still simmered on stoves. Bread sat half-sliced. A dog barked itself hoarse. Tied to a post no one came back to untie. Even the livestock were gone, doors left wide open. They searched for days. No bodies, no smoke, no trails. It was as if the entire population, 312 people, had dissolved into the fog. Decades later, hikers rediscovered the site. Trees had grown over everything, but you could still see the faint outline of stone foundations, and the iron cross of the church bell half buried in moss. Some visitors swore they heard the faint tolling of that bell, one long, low note that seemed to come from nowhere. A historian who studied the area claimed the villagers had been executed in secret and buried in a nearby quarry. But when excavation teams dug there in the 1960s, they found nothing but shards of porcelain, children's toys, and a single church bell, intact and polished, though no one had touched it. When they tried to move it, the crane's cables snapped twice. One local guide told a darker version. He said the villagers had been warned, "Help them, and your voices will be taken." They helped anyway, and one by one, they lost the ability to speak, their throats tightening, their words dissolving into the cold, until, finally, the last survivor could only ring the bell once, before the silence took him too. He said the bell you hear now isn't real, it's the echo of that final note, still bouncing somewhere between this world and whatever came next. You walk through the imagined ruins now. The air feels heavy, muffled, like sound itself is afraid to exist here. Every crunch of your boot seems too loud. You pass what might have been a well, half filled with rainwater and leaves. The surface trembles slightly, even though there's no wind. You lean closer. For just a second, you think you see faces reflected there, blurred, but watching. Then the ripples fade, and you're left staring at yourself. Maybe that's how the villagers still survive, not as ghosts, but as memories mirror, reflecting whoever dares remember them. A folklorist who visited in the 90s wrote that her recorder picked up a chorus of faint voices speaking at once. None intelligible, all overlapping, like breath through a broken organ. She never returned. The few who camp near the site say the woods go completely quiet around midnight, no crickets, no owls, not even wind, and then, faintly, a bell rings once. Just once. Then silence again, so complete it hurts your ears. You can almost hear it now. Can't you? That soft chime somewhere behind your thoughts. It lingers for a heartbeat, then fades like breath on glass. Maybe they never left. Maybe silence itself was their escape. Or maybe, when a secret is too kind to keep, the only mercy left is to disappear with it. There's a story that haunts every railway line left over from the war. It's older than the bunkers, older than the archives, older even than the word defeat. They call her the woman in the black dress. If you ask 5 people who saw her, you'll get 5 different versions. But they all agree on one thing. She appeared only at the stations where trains of prisoners stopped, and only to those who were about to die. Picture this. A foggy evening somewhere in Poland, 1943. The rails gleam like wet knives. And the station clock ticks, though no one dares look at it. The guards smoke in silence. The smell of tobacco fighting against the stench of oil and fear. Then the air changes. Someone always notices it first, a sudden stillness. The kind that presses against your eardrums. The dogs stop barking. Even the wind seems to hold its breath. And that's when she appears. Always the same distance away. A woman in a black dress. Standing near the edge of the platform. Not moving, not speaking, just watching. Her face is hidden under a black veil. Some said they could see her lips moving beneath it, whispering prayers. Others said her mouth never moved at all, that her silence was the prayer. One German officer, drunk and terrified, tried to approach her once. He shouted that she was trespassing, raised his pistol, and ordered her to step forward. She didn't, but when he blinked, she was standing right in front of him. The man fainted. When he woke, he couldn't stop screaming. His last words before being sent to an asylum were, "She showed me what I've done." The other soldiers refused to speak of her after that. They called her Die Schattenfrau, the shadow woman. But among the prisoners, her story was different. They said she came for mercy. That if you saw her before boarding the train, your suffering would be brief. Some even whispered her name during roll calls. Quietly, as if inviting her protection, Frau knocked. "Come quickly." A nurse stationed near the camps later wrote that she once saw a woman in black walking along the railway at dusk. She assumed it was another refugee until she realized the woman's feet didn't touch the ground. Her hem floated inches above the gravel, untouched by mud or snow. And where she passed, the lanterns dimmed. After the war, strange reports kept surfacing. Engineers claimed to see her at the same abandoned platforms where the deportation trains had once stopped. Always at night, always near the tracks. One witness, a Soviet railway inspector, said he saw her reflection in a puddle before he saw her in front of him. It was like the ground remembered her first. He said, he left his post the next morning and never returned to rail work again. Even now, survivors speak of her in hushed tones. Some think she was a real woman, perhaps a nurse or nun who tried to bless the condemned before they left. Maybe she was executed for it, and her ghost stayed to finish what her faith began. Others think she never existed at all, that she was the collective vision of thousands of people on the edge of death, imagining a final kindness in a world without it. But there's a third version, told by railway workers who've seen too much to laugh, that she isn't a ghost at all, but a memory made visible. That every scream, every name shouted from a departing train, every last look between separated families, all of it condensed into one shape that history could understand. Her. The woman in the black dress. You can almost see her now. Can't you? The faint glimmer of a lantern in the fog. The outline of her veil moving slightly with no wind. She doesn't walk, she glides, pausing at each carriage door as though counting souls. Sometimes, they say, she looks directly at those who watch her. And if she does, you'll feel your lungs tighten, as if someone's standing behind you, breathing slowly into your neck. But it's not fear she brings, it's awareness. A heavy kind of knowing. Historians who catalog wartime folklore often skip her story. They say it's too sentimental, too strange. Yet, in old station ledgers, there are pages with ink smeared by water, tears, rain, or something else. Next to one name, a penciled note reads simply, "She came." If you ever visit one of those derelict train stops, the ones fenced off, half swallowed by weeds, you might find an old rusted bell near the platform edge. Locals say if you strike it once and wait, the fog will shift. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see her standing there. Not to scare you, not to hurt you, just to remind you what silence looks like when it wears a dress. You wake to the soft buzz of static, that faint, grainy hum that used to fill every room before a broadcast began. It's a sound that feels like waiting. And tonight's story is about that feeling, about the things that stare back when you wait too long. They called it the mirror of propaganda. Berlin, 1941. The Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, an elegant title for a monstrous place. You can almost picture it: polished floors, marble staircases, and endless corridors lined with portraits of leaders smiling too hard. Every surface gleamed, reflecting perfection, because reflection, in this world, was control. The story begins with a mirror. It wasn't large, just shoulder high. Framed in dark oak, hanging in a narrow hallway outside the main editing suite. No one knew who brought it there, or why it had been installed at all. The cleaning staff avoided it. Editors joked that it was Goebbels's second set of eyes. But over time, people stopped joking. Because the mirror changed. One night, an assistant named Frida stayed late developing film reels, endless news footage twisted to make tragedy look triumphant. She'd been staring at the glowing images so long her eyes burned. On her way out, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Except, it wasn't a reflection. Not exactly. She looked tired, yes, but behind her, in the mirror's glass, the office door was open, even though she'd just locked it. And inside, she could see the reels still turning on their own. When she turned around, the door was closed. She left immediately. The next morning, she told a colleague, who laughed. "The mirror's only job," he said, "is to make sure we believe our own lies look good." But a few days later, he stopped showing up. When they checked his office, his desk was immaculate. Only a single reel sat in the projector, burned through the center, as if the film had watched itself too long. Rumors spread fast. Staff began saying the mirror showed things the cameras didn't. Flashes of faces behind the crowd scenes. Soldiers missing from the footage. A child staring directly at the lens long after she should have vanished in the cut. Some even swore they saw their own reflections blink a fraction too late. A technician tried to remove it, but the bolts holding it to the wall wouldn't move. Like they'd fused, he said. Others swore the glass was warm to the touch, warmer than the air around it. One guard claimed he saw an entire crowd reflected there one night. Hundreds of people standing in the hallway. Their faces blurred, their mouths moving silently. When he turned, there was nothing, only the mirror, vibrating slightly as if still catching up with time. He resigned the next morning. After the war, Allied officers cataloging the building's contents found the mirror still hanging there. It was the only item not tagged or listed. When they tried to photograph it, every picture came out blank. When one officer looked directly into it, he reportedly whispered, "They're still speaking." The mirror disappeared a few weeks later. Officially, it was lost during transport. Unofficially, one of the investigators took it home. He lived near Munich. 2 months later, neighbors complained about lights flickering in his house at night. When police entered, they found every bulb shattered. The walls covered with old news clippings and film stills. Faces of people who shouldn't have been there. In the center of the room stood the mirror, cracked from corner to corner. The officer was never found. Historians dismiss the tale as Cold War paranoia, a metaphor for guilt reflecting back on the propagandists. But others, collectors of strange artifacts, archivists of cursed things, believe the mirror still exists, moving quietly between private hands. They say it doesn't show your reflection anymore. It shows your intentions. If you stand in front of it and lie, your mouth doesn't move. If you tell the truth, it smiles for you. One man claimed to have seen it in an auction house in Prague in the 1990s. He didn't bid. He said the mirror's glass shimmered faintly like film being projected. And when he looked closer, he saw black and white footage of himself, older, afraid, and whispering something he couldn't yet understand. You pause now, imagining it, the hum of old film, the flicker of light on glass, the feeling that your reflection knows what you're trying not to think. Maybe the mirror was never haunted. Maybe it was just honest. Because propaganda isn't just lies told loudly. It's truth told too softly. And maybe, for a brief moment in that dark hallway, the mirror remembered what truth actually looked like. If you ever find yourself in a museum full of wartime relics, and one of the display cases feels slightly warmer than the rest, don't lean too close. Don't try to adjust your hair, or straighten your tie, because sometimes, the reflection isn't yours anymore. And if it smiles when you don't, walk away. You've probably heard of Dachau, the first concentration camp, the model for all that followed. But tonight, you won't hear the usual history. Tonight, you'll hear what the guards whispered when the lights went out. They called them the sleepwalkers of Dachau. By 1943, the camp had become a world of its own. A small city of hunger, disease, and obedience. Everything ran on rhythm, the whistles, the shouts, the boots, the silence. The human body became a machine, trained to wake, work, collapse, repeat. But then, one night, something broke in that rhythm. A guard on the night shift, a young man named Rolf, reported seeing a prisoner walking through the barracks after curfew. Not sneaking, not hiding, walking, head up, eyes open, bare feet silent against the floorboards. Rolf called out. The prisoner didn't respond. When he stepped closer, he saw the man's eyes. They were open, yes, but blank. No fear, no awareness, just motion. Steady and slow, like he was following music no one else could hear. Rolf raised his rifle. The man walked right past him. The next morning, no one could find that prisoner's name on the roll. At first, the guards thought it was a one-off, exhaustion, delusion, maybe a trick of the mind. But soon others began to see them too. Figures moving through the camp at night. Pale under the moon, drifting through fences as if the barbed wire had forgotten to exist. They didn't run or hide. They just walked. Always in single file. Always toward the same direction, the eastern wall. Where the crematorium stood. The guards started calling them Die Schlafgänger, the sleepwalkers. A doctor at the camp, Dr. Reiter, wrote in his diary that he was ordered to investigate the phenomenon. He stayed up 3 nights in a row, watching through the infirmary window. Around 2 a.m., he heard it, the soft scrape of skin against wood. When he turned, 5 prisoners were standing in the yard below, eyes open, heads tilted upward. Silent. He described the scene. They moved as though the ground remembered them. and they were trying to step carefully so as not to wake it. He went outside, calling to them. They didn't answer. When he touched one on the shoulder, the man collapsed, limp, breathing shallowly, as though just pulled from deep sleep. When they carried him to the infirmary, his pulse was steady, but his brain waves, as recorded on primitive equipment, looked like those of someone dreaming. Dr. Reiter wrote one more entry: "They are asleep, but they do not belong to us anymore." He was transferred to another camp 2 weeks later. The entries stopped. After the war, survivors told their own versions. Some said the sleepwalkers were real prisoners who had found a way to escape consciousness, drifting between life and death to survive. Others said they were the dead themselves, those whose names had been erased, walking the camp one last time so history couldn't forget their footsteps. A few survivors swore they'd seen them after liberation, shapes gliding through the snow while the Americans dismantled the fences. One American soldier described it in his report. "We thought they were shadows from the floodlights until one of them passed through the beam. The light didn't bend, it vanished, just for a second, like something had swallowed it." The locals in Dachau still avoid the area near the old crematorium after dark. They say if you walk there at night, you'll see footprints appear in the frost, forming a single line that stops abruptly at the wall. And if you follow them, you might feel yourself growing heavy, not afraid, but tired, like your body is forgetting how to stay awake. Every year, on the anniversary of the camp's liberation, someone reports faint singing from the ruins, slow, rhythmic, like a lullaby hummed in a language no one recognizes. Historians say it's the power of memory, not ghosts. The brain fills silence with what it expects to hear. The ground, warmed unevenly, creates illusions of motion in the mist. Perfectly rational explanations. But those who have heard the song say otherwise. They say it doesn't come from outside. It starts inside your head, as if something half asleep in you has started to wake. You imagine it now, that low, haunting hum, steady as footsteps. The kind of sound that doesn't scare you immediately, it just makes you forget why you were ever comfortable. Maybe the sleepwalkers were never trapped. Maybe they simply refused to die in a world that refused to dream. And maybe they're still walking through our history, our nightmares, our quiet hours, reminding us that even the deepest sleep can't erase the memory of suffering. So if you ever visit Dachau and feel the urge to close your eyes, don't. Because they say the moment you fall asleep there, someone else wakes up. The war was full of monsters, but some of them wore lab coats. And if you believe the whispers from the ruins of the old research compounds, one of those scientists didn't just chase science, he chased something darker. They called him the Devil's Chemist. His real name was Dr. Heinrich Falken. Brilliant, quiet, and always smiling the wrong way, as if the muscles in his face were mimicking emotion rather than feeling it. Before the war, he'd been a respected biochemist in Munich, studying metabolic disorders. After 1939, he disappeared into the military research division. When he re-emerged, he no longer studied diseases, he studied enhancement. He believed he could turn the human body into a perfect machine, one that felt no pain, no hunger, no hesitation, a soldier who never stops. He once wrote, "A man beyond morality." It began with stimulants, Pervitin tablets. methamphetamine disguised as vitamins. Ordinary soldiers called them pilot's chocolate. Falcon wanted more. He started mixing compounds: morphine, adrenaline, atropine, and something he refused to name in his notes. He called it Compound V7. Early tests were conducted on volunteers, then on prisoners. The results were terrifying. Some subjects went 3 days without sleep or food. Others felt no pain even after breaking bones. One man reportedly ran 40 kilometers through snow barefoot before collapsing. But when they finally did collapse, they didn't die right away. Their hearts kept beating long after brain activity had stopped. Falcon claimed it was a sign of transcendence. His assistants called it possession. One night, a janitor working in the lab heard a sound, a wet, rhythmic thud, like something heavy striking the wall over and over. When he peeked through the glass, he saw one of the test subjects standing, his hands raw, pounding his head against the tiles while whispering something in Latin. The janitor ran. When he returned with guards, the man was gone. Only a blood smear remained, shaped roughly like a handprint. And Dr. Falcon was smiling. "He's crossed over," he said. The guards transferred him to another facility the next day. When the Allies advanced in 1945, the lab was evacuated, files burned, equipment smashed. But Falcon stayed behind, claiming he was close to an answer. Witnesses reported that he'd been sleeping in the lab for weeks, barely eating, muttering to himself in a language that wasn't German. Then, on the night before surrender, the building exploded. Except, there was no fire. No bomb crater. Just the roof torn upward, as if something inside had escaped. The few soldiers who entered the wreckage later said the walls were covered in symbols drawn in chemical stains, circles, triangles, equations merging into words. In the center of the room, they found a single object, a beaker, cracked but intact, filled with black residue that pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. No trace of Falcon. Years later, in the 1950s, villagers near the site began reporting strange lights in the forest, blue-white flashes that flickered silently through the trees. Animals were found dead but perfectly preserved, their eyes wide open, their veins darkened. A journalist investigating the ruins found fragments of old notebooks fused into the concrete. One phrase appeared again and again: energy without morality. Some of the locals say the devil's chemist succeeded. That whatever he summoned, or synthesized, wasn't an explosion at all. It was a transformation. They say he became the thing he was creating. A declassified Allied report from 1952 mentions an unidentified man arrested in Buenos Aires claiming to be Falcon's assistant. He described his former mentor as a man who spoke to shadows and thought they were equations. Before the man could be questioned further, he was found dead in his cell, every bone in his body calcified, as if turned to stone. No one ever found Falcon, though stories persist. Some say he appears to hikers near the ruins, a tall figure in a tattered white coat, eyes glowing faintly blue, his skin gray like ash. He never speaks, but the air around him smells sharply of chlorine and burnt sugar. Others claim he built a new lab underground and still experiments, searching for the perfect soldier in a war that never ends. A few of his original notebooks survive in private collections. One entry reads, "The formula works. The subject endures. But it is no longer him, it is something wearing him. And it recognizes me." You can almost picture it. A man so consumed by control that he became what he feared. A mind still awake in a body that refuses to die. Maybe that's the true curse of those who play with power, that one day power starts playing back. So if you ever smell chemicals where none should be, or feel your heart race for no reason, don't look around, just leave. Because if the devil's chemist really found what he was looking for, he's still testing it. And maybe tonight, you're the experiment. You've probably heard static before, the hiss between radio stations, the white noise that fills empty rooms. But what if that static wasn't empty? What if it was full of voices, waiting for someone to listen? That's what this story is about. They called it the radio that spoke back. Berlin, winter of 1945. The city was crumbling, black smoke rising in pillars, the streets echoing with distant gunfire. Electricity was unreliable. Communication lines were failing, but still, the propaganda broadcasts continued. In a small apartment near Alexanderplatz, a woman named Greta worked for the Ministry of Communications. Her job was simple: test radio frequencies, note interference, and report which ones remained operational after each bombing raid. Every evening, she turned the dial through the static, SSSCCCCHHHHHH, until she caught the faint hum of a broadcast. Sometimes she heard official reports. Sometimes, music. Sometimes, nothing. Then one night, she heard something impossible. Her own name. Greta. Soft, drawn out, almost a sigh. It came through the static like someone whispering right into her ear. She froze, listening. The voice continued, slow, deliberate, familiar. It was her mother's voice. Her mother had been dead for 3 years. Greta thought she was imagining it. The stress, the exhaustion, the constant sirens. But when she turned the dial back, there it was again. Louder this time. "Greta, come home." She unplugged the radio and didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she told her supervisor. He warned her not to mention it again. "You know what happens," he said quietly, "to people who hear the wrong things." But others had heard it too. Technicians began reporting strange transmissions late at night, overlapping voices. Sometimes in German, sometimes not. Once, an entire frequency played nothing but breathing for 30 minutes straight. Another carried the sound of marching boots, though the recording room was empty. A rumor spread. The dead were trying to talk. An engineer named Klaus decided to investigate. He stayed overnight in the central broadcast tower, recording frequencies between the official channels. Around midnight, he caught something, a faint melody, like a lullaby. Then, a voice. Not a ghostly whisper. Clear, human, calm. "We hear you. Do you hear us?" Klaus froze. He tried responding, speaking into the microphone. "Who is this?" The voice replied, exactly in his own tone. "Who is this?" He turned off the mic. But the reply came again, the exact same words. The exact same pause between them. It wasn't an echo. It was mimicry. Klaus smashed the radio to pieces and fled. The next morning, he resigned and was never seen again. When Allied troops later entered Berlin, They found dozens of abandoned radios still running, each tuned to slightly different frequencies. Some emitted faint beeping, others garbled speech. One radio, discovered in Greta's apartment, still played a repeating phrase every night at 3:15 a.m. "We can't stop the signal. We are the signal." The plug had been removed. And yet, it still played. Years later, amateur radio enthusiasts tried to track the source. They found a frequency band near 7.21 MHz that produced what they called the Berlin hum, a low oscillating tone that occasionally formed words. Every attempt to decode it failed. But listeners described strange side effects. Hearing whispers even after turning the radio off. Dreaming of voices speaking backwards. Lights flickering when the hum intensified. A retired soldier once claimed he heard his own wartime radio code coming through decades later, a sequence only he knew. When he tapped back his acknowledgement in Morse, the transmission stopped mid-signal, as if someone on the other end had realized he was alive. Skeptics say it's all electrical interference, reflections of old signals bouncing off the ionosphere. Overlapping decades of static and ghost broadcasts. Rational enough. But those who've heard it say otherwise. They describe the voices as too precise, too personal, not random data, not coincidence, intentional. Some believe it's the residue of the old propaganda network itself, the voices of millions. Trapped between frequencies, repeating their messages forever. Others whisper a darker version, that the broadcasts were experiments, signals encoded with hypnotic tones designed to manipulate thought. When the system collapsed, the code went rogue. Now it looks for new receivers. You can almost hear it now. Can't you? That faint static hum in the background. The one that might just be in your ears. Or maybe not. They say if you tune an old shortwave radio to 7.21 MHz at exactly 3:15 a.m., you'll hear the same line Greta did. The words are faint, buried in static. But if you listen carefully, they form a sentence. Don't turn around, we're right behind you. Maybe it's just interference. Maybe it's memory. Or maybe, some signals never stop broadcasting, even when the people who sent them are long gone. So if you ever find an old radio, and it turns on by itself, don't listen. Because once you do, you might start hearing yourself answer back. They say the cold can preserve everything, flesh, fear, even guilt. And in the Russian winter of 1943, something truly was preserved, not by accident, not by nature, but by something else entirely. This is the story of the Frozen Battalion. The legend begins on the Eastern Front. Near Lake Ladoga, the German 11th Infantry Division had been marching for days through snow that swallowed whole trucks. Temperatures dropped below -40°C. Communication lines froze, fuel ran out, and even time seemed to slow. The soldiers made camp in the forest. They lit fires that refused to burn, ate ice that cracked their teeth, and listened to the sound of wolves that never came closer. Then, one night, everything went quiet. When dawn came, patrols from a nearby unit arrived, and found them. Hundreds of soldiers, standing perfectly upright in formation. Rifles in hand, helmets straight, faces calm. Frozen solid. Their eyes open. It looked like discipline taken to divine extremes, an army turned to ice mid-command. But here's the part that made even the veterans shudder. Their boots hadn't sunk into the snow. It was as if they'd been standing on stone, not powder. And there were no footprints leading in or out. At first, the Germans blamed a Soviet ambush, gas. Maybe, but there were no signs of struggle. No wounds. No defensive positions. Just perfect order. The Soviets who eventually reached the site thought it was a ruse. A trap made of wax mannequins to lure them closer. But when one soldier brushed snow from a face, the skin beneath was cold but soft, as if the man could wake at any moment. And then the eyes moved. Just slightly. Enough for the Soviet to drop his rifle and run screaming into the woods. Both sides tried to bury the story. Officially, the 11th Infantry Division was listed as missing in action. The coordinates of the frozen field were erased from maps. But whispers spread among survivors about a cursed stretch of tundra where compasses spun wild and the snow never melted. Years later, a research team sent to the region during the 1960s claimed to have rediscovered the site. The lead scientist, Dr. Petrov, described it as a pocket of preserved atmosphere, where frost formed instantly on metal and radio waves went dead. He noted something else. All the frozen soldiers had the same expression, not fear. Not pain. Attention. As if still waiting for orders. Petrov's team extracted one body for analysis. The tissue showed no decomposition. Blood cells were intact, frozen mid-motion. Even stranger, the eyes reacted faintly to light. Within a week, the research team disbanded. Petrov never published his findings. One of his assistants reportedly muttered before vanishing, "They're not dead, they're listening." Locals began to avoid the area entirely. Hunters who ventured too close spoke of mirrors in the snow, patches of ice that reflected movement a few seconds after it happened. A Soviet helicopter once flew overhead and reported thermal signatures below. Though the ground temperature was -50°C. Nothing should have been warm. Decades passed, but when satellite imaging became available, analysts noticed something eerie. Every winter, the same section of the forest emitted faint electromagnetic pulses, like a heartbeat. Slow and steady. One researcher joked that it was the world's coldest radio. Another, less amused, said, "No, it's marching practice." Historians try to rationalize it. Carbon monoxide poisoning, mass hypothermia, natural gas leaks. Logical, sterile explanations. But those who have been there tell a different story, one that starts not with science, but with sound. They say when the wind passes through that forest, it doesn't howl, it sings. A low, rhythmic hum, too steady to be random, like the cadence of marching boots far beneath the snow. Sometimes, if you stand very still, you'll hear it grow louder, then stop, right behind you. And if you turn around, you might see figures through the frost. Transparent, shimmering, their helmets catching faint starlight. Standing at attention. Waiting for orders that will never come. You can almost feel it. Can't you? The air tightening, your breath freezing mid-sentence. The sound of distant discipline. Perfectly preserved. Maybe they were victims of war. Maybe they were trapped by something older. A curse that punishes obedience without conscience. Whatever it was, the result is the same. They never decayed. They never slept. They never left. And the snow never covers them fully. It always leaves the faces bare, watching. So if you ever find yourself near Lake Ladoga, and you see a shape in the distance, don't wave. Don't shout. Don't even breathe too loudly. Because those men are still listening for the next command. And if you make a sound, they might think it's you giving it. Hospitals are supposed to be places of healing. But in Ravensbrück, medicine became something else, something colder, quieter, crueler. The survivors called her the Doctor of Ravensbrück. Ravensbrück was the largest concentration camp for women. It sat near a lake, so still it looked peaceful from a distance, but the peace was only surface. Inside, beneath the chimneys and the barbed wire, the air stank of disinfectant and burning linen. They said she never raised her voice. That was the first thing everyone remembered about her. Her name was Dr. Elise Weber, a physician. Elegant, calm, and terrifyingly polite. She was always in white gloves. Even when she worked. Especially when she worked. She believed she could free the body from pain by teaching it obedience. Her experiments were meant to advance recovery for the wounded. Or so the reports said. But no one ever recovered. It began with small procedures, injections, incisions, tests of tolerance. Prisoners were chosen at random, their legs marked with chalk numbers. They were given sedatives that didn't sedate, anesthetics that didn't work. Weber would stand beside the table, humming softly as she cut. She recorded everything in a small leather notebook. Sometimes she would stop mid-operation and ask, "Do you feel it?" If the patient said yes, she'd smile faintly and whisper, "Good, then you're still here." Some said she believed she could trap life, hold it in place between death and survival. Others thought she was looking for a way to reanimate nerves. A few guards swore she spoke to her patients even after they died, as though expecting them to answer. One nurse, Anna, claimed she saw Weber talking to an empty bed. She stood there for 10 minutes. Anna wrote in her secret diary. Then she leaned forward and said, "You're improving." That bed, of course, had been empty for 3 days. Another time, Weber locked herself in the infirmary for an entire night. The next morning, the nurses found the room freezing, frost on the inside of the windows. Instruments crusted with ice. In the center of the room stood Weber, her gloved hands red with blood, staring at a single jar filled with something pale and pulsing. When they asked what it was, she said, "A heart that refuses to die." They thought she was speaking metaphorically. Until it moved. After the camp's liberation, the Allied investigators found her records, though many were burned. The surviving pages described Procedure 47B, induced dormancy at low temperature, and reactivation through shock stimuli. It seemed she believed she could teach a body to survive any trauma by simulating death, forcing it into a state between freezing and waking. When they searched for her, she was gone. Her white coat was found folded on the bed in her quarters. On the desk, her notebook, and inside it, one final entry. "Pain is not the enemy. Pain is the proof that the soul hasn't left yet. If I can hold it here long enough, maybe it never will." No one ever found her body. Years later, locals living near the camp began reporting strange lights by the lake, a bluish glow that shimmered just above the water at night. Fishermen said their nets came up empty. Except for one thing: medical gauze. Still white. Still clean. Some visitors to the Ravensbrück Memorial claim that when they walk through the reconstructed infirmary, they can smell disinfectant, sharp, chemical, impossible to forget. A few even report seeing frost on the glass of display cases during summer months. One woman fainted while reading the doctor's preserved notes. When she woke, she said she'd felt someone's hand on her wrist, checking for a pulse. But she was alone. Historians dismiss it as trauma echoing through time, the mind replaying what it can't erase. Rational explanations. But nurses who work in hospitals nearby whisper that sometimes, when a patient is declared clinically dead, the heart monitor blips again. Once, twice, then stillness. They say Dr. Weber's spirit lingers in every ward where life hesitates to leave, in the pause between the last heartbeat and silence. Not as a ghost, but as an idea that refuses to stop experimenting. You picture her now, the woman in white, gloves immaculate, leaning over your bed, her voice low, deliberate. Do you feel it? You want to say no, but your lips don't move. The air around you feels colder, heavier. Good, she whispers. Then you're still here. Some stories don't end with death. They end with waiting. And sometimes, what waits, learns patience. So if you ever visit Ravensbrück, and your breath fogs even on a warm day, don't linger, don't touch the glass. Because if she's still listening for heartbeats, she might decide to check yours next. There are clocks that measure time. And there are clocks that remember it. The one inside the SS headquarters in Wewelsburg was the second kind, a timekeeper that refused to die. Even when the hands of history stopped moving. They called it the clock that never stopped. When the Allies finally reached the castle at Wewelsburg in 1945, they expected chaos. Instead, they found silence. The halls were empty. The archives half burned, and the great stone tower, Himmler's obsession, filled with the smell of oil and iron dust. In the center of the tower stood the clock. It was massive, built directly into the wall, its gears interlocking like vertebrae, its face carved with runes instead of numbers. No manufacturer's mark. No mechanism anyone recognized. And it was still ticking. Every second, a sharp, metallic clack that echoed through the chamber like a metronome for ghosts. At first, the soldiers ignored it. There were more important things to handle: documents, evidence, the human wreckage of ideology. But the ticking never stopped. Days passed. And the sound grew louder. Or maybe just closer. Then, one morning, a lieutenant noticed something odd. The hands on the clock weren't moving forward. They were turning backward. At exactly one revolution every 24 hours. They disassembled it, or tried to. Every gear they removed began turning again once set down. They tried breaking the glass, it wouldn't crack. They tried stopping the pendulum, it swung on its own. Even when pinned. Eventually, they covered it with a tarp and locked the room. But the ticking went right through the stone. One soldier compared it to a heartbeat under the floor. Rumors started immediately. Some said the clock had been designed by Himmler himself. Meant to measure Aryan eternity. Others believed it was part of an occult ritual, a machine built to reverse time and erase defeat. A former SS officer, captured months later, claimed the clock was calibrated to the hour of resurrection. When asked what that meant, he smiled and said, "You'll hear it when it reaches 0." Then he refused to speak again. Years passed. The castle became a museum. The clock remained hidden behind sealed doors, but visitors began reporting strange sensations: watches stopping, compasses spinning, phones losing charge. Some swore they could feel pressure in their chests, like something pulling their heartbeat into rhythm with the unseen ticking. In the 1970s, a group of engineers reopened the chamber for study. The air was dry and cold. Though no ventilation existed, the clock still ran, its hands moving backward just as before. When they connected a microphone to record the sound, they discovered an extra pulse between ticks, a faint whisper, too rhythmic to be random. When the audio was slowed down, it formed a word: Zurück, back. Later that night, one of the engineers, a man named Dieter, stayed behind to take photographs. He kept a log of his session. The final entry read, "The clock is slowing. I can feel it in my chest. I think it's syncing with my pulse." Dieter was found dead the next morning, his watch frozen at 3:06 a.m. The clock in the tower, however, continued ticking, steady as ever. In 1999, the museum underwent renovations. Workers finally opened the sealed room. The clock had stopped at last. The hands were frozen in place, both pointing straight up to midnight. Relieved, they began dismantling it for preservation. But when the lead curator touched one of the gears, he cut his hand on an edge that was strangely warm. The blood fell onto the metal, and the clock started again. Visitors who come today say they can hear it faintly through the walls, not loud, just enough to make you doubt yourself. The guides never mention it. The staff claim it's wind, plumbing, imagination. But if you listen carefully in the tower's lower chamber, you'll hear the rhythm: clack, clack, clack. And if you stay long enough, you'll realize it's not random. It's counting down. You can almost feel it now, that vibration in your chest, matching your heartbeat just slightly out of sync. The kind that makes your skin tighten and your pulse quicken, like time itself is watching you from the corner of the room. Maybe the clock was never a timepiece at all. Maybe it was a container, built to hold something that didn't want to die when the Reich did. Something that still ticks inside history's walls, waiting for the hands to line up again. So if you ever visit Wewelsburg and find yourself in that round tower, and your watch suddenly stops, don't panic. Just step back, slowly. Because when the ticking stops completely, that's when it starts remembering. Of all the relics left from the Reich, none carries as much whispered dread as a simple band of gold, a ring said to have passed through too many hands. Each one ending the same way, with loss, madness, or death. They called it the curse of Eva Braun's ring. It began, like most obsessions, with love dressed as loyalty. Eva Braun, Hitler's mistress, later his wife for a single, doomed day, owned very little that wasn't controlled, catalogued, or approved by someone else. But there was one piece of jewelry that didn't appear in any official inventory. A gold ring with a small sapphire set in a black enamel band. No one knows who gave it to her. Some said Hitler himself. Others said it came from a mystic advisor, a woman in Vienna rumored to craft protective charms for the elite. The story goes that Eva wore the ring constantly during the war, claiming it kept away nightmares. But the nightmares never really left her. When the bunker fell, and the last hours of the Reich bled into silence, the ring vanished, the bodies were burned, the walls collapsed, and what remained was ash, memory, and rumor. Then, in 1947, a Soviet officer stationed in Berlin wrote a letter to his wife describing a beautiful sapphire ring he'd found among confiscated artifacts. Within 2 weeks, he was dead, a fall from a fifth-story balcony during an investigation. His wife later received the ring in a sealed box. She refused to wear it, but kept it in her dresser drawer. Neighbors began complaining about a strange humming sound coming from her apartment at night, a tone like glass vibrating. She moved the ring to a locked cabinet, and the noise stopped. For a while. When she died years later, the ring was gone again. It resurfaced in 1963 at a private auction in Prague. The catalogue listed it simply as gold ring, German origin, sapphire, circa 1940s. A British collector bought it for the equivalent of £300, and reportedly collapsed in the lobby before he could leave with it. The autopsy showed heart failure. The ring was never logged among his possessions. Decades passed, and the stories blurred into myth. Yet every few years, it appeared again, in a museum basement, a collector's vault, an inheritance dispute, always unmarked, always unclaimed. Each new owner described similar experiences. A low vibration when the ring was nearby. Cold spots that lingered long after it was removed. And dreams. Always the same dream. A woman standing in a mirror, twisting the ring on her finger, whispering, "I should have left sooner." A historian in Munich, Dr. Lenz, became obsessed with tracing the artifact's path. He believed the ring was part of an occult exchange, that Hitler's inner circle sought to bind their fates through symbolic objects, attempting to carry power beyond death. He finally located what he believed to be the original in a private collection in Argentina. When the owner agreed to let him photograph it, Dr. Lenz brought his assistant and a small tape recorder. The recording still exists. At first, it's just the hum of machinery. Then, as he describes the ring, you hear the faint sound of something metallic rolling across the table. The assistant asks, "Did you move it?" Lenz replies, "No." There's a pause, then a gasp. And then, in a voice faint but unmistakable, a woman's whisper, "Not yet." The tape ends there. Neither Lenz nor his assistant were seen again. Their rental car was found abandoned on a mountain road. Inside, the recorder, and on the passenger seat, a faint circle burned into the fabric, the size of a ring. To this day, collectors and historians argue over whether the ring ever existed. Some say it's a fabrication, a legend spun from the ashes of infamy. Others insist the curse is real, an echo of fear so intense it clung to an object. One researcher claimed to have seen the ring during restoration work at a Berlin museum. "It looked ordinary," he said, "until I turned away. Then, out of the corner of my eye, the stone flashed red, not blue." He refused to touch it again. You can almost imagine it now, lying somewhere in a velvet box, innocent and gleaming, waiting for another hand to slip it on. Maybe it's still out there. Maybe someone's wearing it right now, unaware of the history coiled around their finger like a whisper that never fades. Or maybe it was never cursed at all. Maybe it's just the last memory of a woman who realized too late that love built on fear was already a form of dying. Either way, if you ever find a gold ring with a blue stone, and it hums softly in your hand, don't keep it. Don't sell it. Don't even look at it for too long. Just bury it deep, and walk away before it remembers your name. There are ruins that crumble quietly. And there are ruins that refuse to stay silent. The remains of the old theater in Dresden were the second kind, the kind that sing when no one's listening. They called it the Singing Ruins. In February 1945, the city of Dresden became a firestorm. Allied bombs turned one of Europe's most beautiful Baroque cities into a furnace. Whole districts vanished overnight, but somehow, amid all that destruction, the old Opernhaus, the old opera house, didn't collapse immediately. Its marble pillars blackened, its roof caved in, but the stage still stood. And for 3 days after the bombing, smoke poured from it in strange rhythm, like breath. On the 4th day, people nearby swore they heard music. Not from an orchestra, not from a radio, from the ruins themselves. A low, haunting melody rising and fading through the charred walls, weaving between the rubble like a ghost remembering its lines. It started at night, always the same time, a little after midnight. Survivors camping nearby would hear it. The sound of a soprano's voice. Distant but clear, carrying a single sustained note. When rescuers ventured closer, the music would stop. One man, a former stagehand, claimed he recognized the tune, an aria from Wagner's Tannhauser. The same aria the opera company had been rehearsing the day before the bombs fell. They said the lead soprano, Liesl Hartmann, refused to leave during the raid. Witnesses remembered her standing on the stage as the ceiling began to crumble, clutching her costume to her chest. "If I die," she reportedly said, "I'll do it in tune." No one ever found her body. In the months that followed, the ruins became a strange kind of pilgrimage site. People came to hear the singing ruins of Dresden. And more than a few swore the voice wasn't a recording, it answered. A British soldier on post-war patrol wrote in his diary that when he whistled part of the aria into the darkness, a voice finished the phrase for him, softly. Others heard full choruses, faint harmonies echoing from beneath the rubble. When microphones were installed years later, they captured faint vibrations between 0.8 and 1.2 kHz, too precise to be wind, too structured to be random. A physicist from Leipzig tried to explain it. The ruins' surviving beams and cavities formed a kind of natural resonator. Sound waves from the river, the air, the city's heartbeat, all converging into one harmonic frequency. It made sense, but it didn't explain the words. Because when the recordings were cleaned up and amplified, they revealed something that wasn't melody at all, it was speech. And the words, when translated, said, "The audience never left." In the 1950s, Dresden began rebuilding. Workers cleared the old opera site, laying new foundations, but they kept losing tools. Hearing music through their ear protection, sometimes feeling the ground vibrate faintly beneath their boots, in perfect time with a song no one was singing. When the new concert hall opened years later, The builders attended the first rehearsal. The orchestra tuned their instruments, and then, unprompted, the soprano section began humming. Every single singer claimed she just felt it start. The conductor stopped them immediately. The note they'd all hummed together? It was B-flat, the same pitch found in the old recordings. Some say it's all coincidence, acoustic resonance. Trauma imprinting itself on a city's air. But even now, locals say that on cold, quiet nights, you can hear it again. The faint swell of a voice. Pure and strong, rising from the Elb's mist like a single soul refusing to fall silent. Tour guides joke about it. Of course, they tell tourists to whistle near the opera square and listen. Most hear nothing, but once in a while, someone gasps, claiming they heard a faint echo answering back, exactly one note higher. A harmony. Maybe the voice is still there, waiting for the rest of the world to finish rebuilding before she finishes her song. Or maybe the ruins themselves remember, the stones still vibrating with the memory of applause. The echoes of an audience that burned but never left. You can almost hear it now. Can't you? That soft, rising hum in the distance, neither grief nor joy. But something older, something defiant. Because some performances don't end when the curtain falls. They just keep singing through the smoke. Photographs are supposed to capture truth, a fraction of a second. Frozen forever. But what if a photograph refuses to stay still? This is the story of the last photograph. Spring, 1945. The war was collapsing, but the propaganda machine still demanded beauty, proof that Germany endured. A young photojournalist named Emil Weiss was assigned to document the final courage of the fatherland. He didn't believe in the cause anymore, but he believed in images. So he kept his head down, his lens focused, and his doubts quiet. One evening, near the outskirts of Berlin, Emil took what would become his last photograph. The sky was a dull orange haze, the kind that makes everything look painted in rust. Two officers were standing beside a ruined truck, one lighting a cigarette, the other staring at the horizon. Behind them, smoke rose like a curtain. Emil framed the shot, pressed the shutter, and moved on. He developed the film that night in a basement darkroom. The chemicals were old, the water murky, but he knew his craft. He hung the wet negatives to dry, and that's when he noticed it. There was a third figure in the frame. He checked the others, nothing. Then he returned to that one image. Two officers. Yes, but between them, slightly blurred, was another shape, tall, indistinct, almost transparent. Its outline was human, but its face was wrong. Not missing, just unfinished. Emil thought it was a chemical error. Light leakage maybe, but when he turned the negative over, the shape was on both sides, burned into the film. He tried again, developing a new copy from the same exposure. This time, the figure was clearer. He could see the curve of its shoulders, the suggestion of eyes, or where eyes should have been. He stared at it for a long time. Then, out of nervous curiosity, he turned to the darkroom mirror. And for a moment, just a flicker, there it was again. Behind him. He smashed the mirror, packed his things, and left that night. Weeks later, Allied soldiers found the photo among his belongings. It was labeled in Emil's handwriting. They were not alone. The soldiers joked about it. passing it around, but when the negatives were sent to London for analysis, the figure appeared darker, as if it had developed further on its own. The lab technician who handled it quit after the image burned faintly into his forearm through the glove, a perfect silhouette of a hand. The file was sealed under unexplained photochemical phenomena. For decades, the photo disappeared into archives. Then, in 1978, it resurfaced during a museum exhibition on wartime photography. The curator displayed it quietly, unmarked, among hundreds of anonymous prints. Visitors noticed it immediately. Not because of the image, but because of what happened when they looked at it too long. One described a faint reflection moving behind the glass, even when she stepped aside. Another said the two officers' eyes shifted slightly, glancing toward the blurred figure. The museum removed it after 3 nights, claiming humidity had warped the frame. But the security footage told a different story. At exactly 2:17 a.m. each night, the lights flickered, and for 6 seconds, the photograph turned completely black. When the lights stabilized, the glass showed a reflection of the empty gallery, and 3 figures standing in it. Experts call it pareidolia, the brain's trick of finding meaning in randomness. Others think it's something more poetic, guilt imprinted on emulsion, emotion captured deeper than silver nitrate can explain. But people who've seen it in person describe the same thing, a pressure in the chest. Like the photo is breathing. One restorer swore that when he touched the frame, the temperature dropped, and faintly, under his breath, he heard a voice say, "Again." He never entered a darkroom again. You imagine it now, don't you? That faded black and white print. 2 soldiers frozen forever in their final calm. And between them, a shadow that doesn't belong. You know it's just a photograph. Just paper and chemicals. And yet, if you lean close enough, the edges of the figure almost seem to shimmer, like it's still trying to form. Maybe Emile didn't photograph something in front of him. Maybe he caught something waiting behind the lens. After all, a camera doesn't just take, it mirrors. And mirrors, as we've already learned, never forget what they see. So if you ever come across an old war photo, and you notice a blur between the faces, don't sharpen it. Don't enhance it. Don't look too long. Because some images are still developing. There are some ghosts that don't hide. They march. Not in secret, not in whispers, but in perfect, echoing rhythm. They call this one the Shadow Parade. Every year, on the same night, May 8, Berlin trembles. Not from celebration, not from memory, but from footsteps. Hundreds of them, thousands, maybe, too soft to be heard on their own. But together, they create a low, steady vibration that moves through the pavement like a heartbeat. Locals used to joke it was traffic, or subways, or tourists, but people who live near Wilhelmstrasse, the old administrative heart of the Reich, know better. Because when the streets go empty after midnight, the shadows start moving. The first recorded sighting came in 1946. A British sentry stationed near the ruins of the Reich Chancellery reported dark shapes walking down the street in formation. He thought it was looters. He aimed his flashlight. There was nothing there. But when he turned off the light, he saw them again, silhouettes. Perfectly aligned, moving silently through the smoke-filled night. He called for backup, and when the others arrived, They saw nothing. Until the sentry collapsed, clutching his chest, whispering, "They saluted me." The phenomenon grew over the years. Construction workers rebuilding central Berlin spoke of seeing bootprints appear in wet concrete overnight, arranged in columns like a marching unit. No one ever claimed responsibility. At first, people thought it was a prank, until one engineer set up a camera to catch the culprits. The film showed nothing for hours, then, at exactly 2 a.m., the image went completely dark for 10 seconds. When it came back, the freshly poured concrete was covered in prints, and a faint smear along the bottom edge of the film looked suspiciously like the outline of a face. By the 1970s, the legend had a name: Der Schattenzug, the Shadow Parade. Some said it was the spirits of soldiers who had refused to surrender, still marching through a city that no longer wanted them. Others thought it was something older, a replaying of the city's trauma, like a scar that pulses when it rains. One historian studying post-war folklore decided to test the myth. He camped near the Chancellery ruins with a microphone and a seismograph. At 1:57 a.m., the seismograph spiked, small, rhythmic tremors at perfect intervals. He noted the pattern, comparing it later to the cadence of military boots on cobblestone. It matched exactly. The microphone, however, picked up something else. A faint murmur beneath the rumble. Not speech. Not song. Counting. Eins. Zwei. Drei. And then, silence. Every May since then, the same thing happens. Street lights along Wilhelmstrasse flicker. Air grows heavy, metallic, like the city itself is holding its breath. And for a few minutes, shadows begin to move without their owners. Witnesses describe them as long, distorted figures stretching across the pavement, walking in perfect formation, only to vanish when headlights pass. One man who saw them in the 1990s swore he could hear fabric brushing against itself, like uniforms shifting in time. Another claimed he heard someone whisper, "Achtung," right behind his ear, though no one was there. Police stopped taking reports decades ago. They simply close certain streets after dark, for maintenance. Psychologists blame collective memory. Physicists blame vibrations from underground trains. But when asked why it always happens on the same night, no one can explain it. There's even a story that during a full moon, if you stand near the Brandenburg Gate and hold your breath, you'll see faint outlines moving across the Pariser Platz, shadows cast by no bodies, saluting an empty sky. People say it feels like the city is performing its own punishment, repeating the steps of its past over and over, so it doesn't forget how it sounds. You can almost hear it now. Can't you? The distant rhythm, thud, thud, thud. A sound that doesn't come from outside, but from under your feet. It's not loud, it's steady, comforting, almost, until you realize the steps are getting closer, and the shadows stretching across the street aren't yours anymore. And if you ever happen to be in Berlin on that night, and the air suddenly cools, and you hear the faint sound of boots on stone, don't run. Don't even move. Because if you break formation, they might notice you're out of step. And then they'll stop marching. Just for you. Libraries are supposed to be places of order, places where knowledge rests quietly. Categorized, catalogued, contained. But not every library obeys the rules of silence. Some whisper back. They called her the librarian of lost names. After the war ended, Europe was full of records, millions of documents. Lists of prisoners, refugees, soldiers, civilians. Most were incomplete, some were fakes, others refused to stay filed. In 1946, a special archive was set up in Nuremberg to index every missing person. It was a monumental task, a building full of names without bodies. Clerks worked in endless shifts, typing, stamping, sorting. And at night, someone else worked too. She was never officially hired. No one remembered her arrival. She simply appeared one morning at her desk, a woman in her 40s. Hair pinned neatly, wearing an old gray cardigan. She introduced herself as Frau Adler, said she had experience with registries, and began working immediately. No one questioned it. Because she was good, too good. She could find files that others had lost for months. She could recite reference numbers from memory. And every morning, there were new lists on her desk, names that hadn't been entered yet. Typed on paper the office didn't stock. When asked where she got them, she smiled and said, "They find me." At first, the staff assumed she worked from old records. But one day, a clerk noticed something impossible. A name on one of Frau Adler's lists matched a newly arrived missing person report, filed that morning. Except the date on her version was stamped 2 days in the future. The supervisor dismissed it as clerical error. Until it happened again, and again. Names appeared before they were reported. Sometimes days before, sometimes weeks. When investigators finally checked her drawer, they found hundreds of typed pages, each name numbered, each crossed out with a single line. And beside every crossed out name, a date. Always the same day that person's body was found. One night, a janitor working late heard the rhythmic clack of a typewriter long after everyone had gone home. He followed the sound to the archive room. Frau Adler was there, typing in complete darkness. The janitor flicked on the light, and froze. The typewriter wasn't plugged in. The paper in the carriage was blank. But her fingers moved with perfect speed, striking invisible keys. He swore the sound continued even after she stopped. When she finally noticed him, she smiled faintly and said, "You shouldn't interrupt them. They don't like being forgotten." He quit the next morning. Weeks later, Frau Adler disappeared. Her desk remained immaculate, her chair pushed in, her cardigan draped neatly over the backrest. But the typewriter still clicked every night, even with no ribbon. No paper. No hands. Eventually, the building director ordered it removed. The worker who carried it out claimed the keys were warm to the touch. When the machine was delivered to a storage facility in Munich, the clerk opened the crate and found a fresh sheet inside, one word typed in the center. "Still here." The typewriter has changed hands several times since. Curators describe strange effects. Drawers opening by themselves. Index cards rearranging overnight. Faint tapping sounds beneath the floorboards. In 1981, a linguist tried using it to test automatic writing. He loaded new paper, typed the question, "Who are you?" The reply came one line below. Letter by letter. The one who remembers what you forget. Today, no one knows where the typewriter is. Some say it's buried in the archives of the International Tracing Service in Bad Arolsen, still cataloging lost souls. Others claim it vanished during a transfer, reappearing wherever new registries of the dead are built. Archivists who work night shifts tell similar stories: the faint sound of typing from an empty room, the sensation that someone just walked behind them, and occasionally, a name appearing on a page they never wrote. Sometimes the name belongs to a person missing for decades. Sometimes, it's their own. You can almost hear it now, that patient clack, 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 echoing through the dark stacks of paper. A quiet reminder that someone, somewhere, is still keeping track. Maybe Frau Adler never left. Maybe she's still at her desk, filing the unfiled, writing the unwritten, crossing out the lost one by one. Because even death, it seems, needs a librarian. So if you ever find yourself alone in an archive late at night, and a page slides out of the cabinet by itself, don't pick it up. If it has your name on it, it's already been checked out. The war ended, but the noise didn't stop. For months, Berlin rattled with the echoes of engines, soldiers, hammers, and grief. Then one night, just one, everything went completely still. That night became legend. They called it the Night of Silence. It was May of 1945. The city was rubble, the air thick with dust and victory smoke. Allied troops patrolled the streets. Refugees wandered in search of anything that still looked like home. And the world exhaled for the first time in years. Then, sometime after midnight, every sound vanished. No gunfire. No wind. No footsteps. Even the rats stopped moving. The silence arrived like a switch had been flipped, absolute, heavy, and total. The first to notice were the soldiers on night patrol. One British officer wrote that his own heartbeat felt deafening. It was as though the world had drawn in breath and refused to let it go. He said, a radio operator at Tempelhof Airfield tried to send a routine signal. Nothing. His equipment hummed, but no sound came out. He thought the transmitter was broken, until he tapped his pen on the desk and realized he couldn't hear it. Across the city, people began stepping outside, confused. Mothers woke their children, dogs refused to bark. Church bells hung motionless, even as the wind pulled at their ropes. The silence lasted for exactly 67 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, a faint noise returned, a low, drawn-out exhale, like the entire city sighing at once. And somewhere deep beneath the streets, someone swore they heard laughter. Decades later, historians tried to explain it. Atmospheric pressure changes. Temporary hearing loss from explosions. Psychological trauma shared by thousands. But the witnesses disagreed. They said it wasn't the silence of absence, it was the silence of presence. A waiting. One survivor described it best. It felt like something enormous had passed over us, looking for the last sound of war. And when it didn't find any, it left. In the years that followed, strange things happened each May. Radios cutting out. Birds vanishing from the sky. Clocks stopping for exactly 1 minute past midnight. Scientists brushed it off as coincidence. Priests called it divine mercy. But those who remembered that night said it was something else, not punishment. Not miracle, a kind of reckoning. A way for the world to test whether we had learned to listen again. One American officer who stayed in Berlin wrote a private note years later. For 1 hour, we lived in perfect stillness. No sides, no shouts, no orders. Just the sound of nothing, and it was the loudest thing I've ever heard. He died in his sleep that same night. Exactly 20 years to the hour. Some say the silence still returns. But only for those who deserve to hear it. People who carry too many names. Too many stories. Too much noise. A journalist who recorded ambient sounds in the old bunker district in the 1990s captured 67 seconds of total audio blankness. No static. No wind. No echo. Just a void. When she amplified it, she found faint wave patterns forming words in Morse code. They translated to one phrase. It's over now. You can almost feel it. Can't you? That strange, soft hush that seems to settle in the back of your mind when the story slows down. The room feels smaller. You're breathing a little louder. The world briefly still. Maybe that's all the night of silence ever was. The universe's way of exhaling after holding its breath through humanity's longest scream. Or maybe it was something else entirely. A reminder that even monsters grow quiet when they realize they've run out of words. And as you lie there now, listening to your own breath, you realize the echoes have faded. The whispers, the footsteps, the laughter, all of it melting into one final, merciful calm. The war, at last, is asleep. And so are you. End of script. Sweet dreams.